These stories really bring to life why it's important we're having this conversation today. In the months to come, Next Century Cities will feature these and other stories. Part of our goal is to elevate these opportunities in the national debate, but we also want to make our member communities, we want to help the outcomes be more the norm rather than the exception across the country. Let's give Mayor Boudreau and Will Aycock another hand. And now we'll be concluding our program with a very exciting conversation. While it should be clearer than ever after what you've heard so far today, that leadership is essential for this success to happen, that leadership has got to come from more than just the mayor. In cities and towns across America, it's visionary chief information and chief innovation officers who are making gigabit dreams into a reality. I'd like to invite to the stage our final panel, who represent a distinguished group of innovators and technologists who have accomplished significant progress in their effort to support their city's goal of ensuring their residents have fast, affordable, and reliable internet. Sorry, I'm standing right in front of you. The moderator for this panel will be Chris Mitchell. Chris is the Director of Community Broadband Networks Initiative with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance in Minneapolis. Chris is a leading national expert on community networks and speaks all over the country on telecommunications policy. Suffice it to say, Chris has long been one of the leading and most important voices in this space. And I'm pleased to share that Chris has decided he would come along and work with Next Century Cities as our policy director while maintaining his role at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Let me turn it over to Chris to introduce our final panelists and help marshal the conclusion to today's meeting. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. It's incredibly exciting to be up here. When you're planning an event like this, you've sort of got an all-star game, and you're trying to figure out if it's going to be a good all-star game or one of those things where it doesn't all mesh together. And at least the people on Twitter are really loving it, I know. So I've been enjoying it, and it seems like everyone's been enjoying it. So I'm incredibly excited to deal with this panel. We're going to be doing some questions that I'm going to lead to begin with. I will be occasionally checking Twitter, but really, if you're in here and you want to get a question, you're going to want to get a microphone in your hands, and I'll give you an opportunity to start planning for that toward the end of the discussion. I'm going to run through some very quick introductions. People who are here, there's extended introductions in the packet, and people who are online can use a search engine. But we're going to keep it short to get on with the show. So sitting next to me is JASCHA FRANKLIN-HODGE with the City of Boston as the Chief Information Officer. I can't use CIO as shorthand because next to him is Ashley Hand with Kansas City, Missouri, and she's the Chief Innovation Officer. JORY Wolf, Chief Information Officer here with Santa Monica, and one of the most popular people last night for both this, where to eat dinner and what's going on with the network. We have next to JORY, GAIL Roper, the Chief Information Officer of Raleigh, North Carolina. And then some diversity in titles. We have my old friend Mary Beth Henry with the City of Portland as the Director of Community Technology, and Terry HUVAL with the City of Lafayette, the Director of Lafayette Utility System. So welcome everyone, and I'm going to start with a very short question, just looking for sort of a one-sentence response to get our mics all warmed up. And that is why your local government decided it needed to take action on broadband issues. And we have a variety of approaches that we'll get into. But I'll start here and work our way down the panel with JASCHA.
Sure. Hi, I'm thrilled to be here. So, I mean, short and simple, no matter what debate is going on at the federal level about the definition of broadband, our citizens in Boston know that it is an essential public utility. And we hear this every day from our, from everyone from the guy who runs the fish market to our local startup communities asking how they can get better broadband and better broadband service. We have an obligation to respond and to try to address those needs.
Excellent.
I think Kansas City, both sides of the state line, sees an opportunity to compete as a region, and it's important for us to provide that essential service as a result of that.
In Santa Monica, we had a call to action as a result of the 1996 Telecommunications Act, and we formed a telecommunications master plan adopted by council. It was important for Santa Monica that we were on the information superhighway. We were not left in the dust or in the rusty railroad tracks of eras before us. It was important for us to have a city that was able to support telemedicine, virtual learning, and also smart grid and other mobile and transportation applications. And we decided if we were going to have that and it was going to be affordable for our community, we had to build it ourselves.
In Raleigh, North Carolina, Raleigh has declared itself an open city. Part of what we decided was that the broadband infrastructure is the next economic development infrastructure, and that we needed to build on what was around us in our community because we had such a high-tech population.
In Portland, Oregon, we believe that fiber to the premise is the platform for our future. We also believe in a high fiber diet of all kinds, and that includes fiber.
In Lafayette, Louisiana, as you heard earlier, we established our own utility system in 1896 when the private guys didn't want to do it. And our business leaders and our elected officials and our Chamber of Commerce believed that the highway of commerce for the future was going to be broadband and internet. And that's what led us to our decision.
Excellent. I want to dive a little bit now. I'm going to ask questions of pairs of people that are somewhat related to each other. Both Boston and Portland have primarily focused on investing in fiber and dig once type policies and other approaches to increase the amount of fiber and conduit throughout the community, primarily to meet internal needs. And so I'm curious, what about owning your own fiber and having the fiber is different from other sorts of approaches? And if you can take that as an opportunity to just describe what you've been doing, that'd be helpful.
Sure, I'll kick that off. So Boston has a fairly substantial institutional network that's been built up over the course of the last 5 years or so. For the most part, we actually do not own our fiber. It is a dark fiber iNet that we get from our largest local broadband provider, Comcast, with RCM providing a small amount of it. I can talk in a second about some of the value that we've seen out of that. The city of Boston is also somewhat interesting in that we have probably one of the first cities in the country to establish a dig once policy. Unfortunately, we established that policy in the era before GIS and digital mapping. And so one of the challenges we have right now is how we actually leverage the conduit that's in the ground, which is mostly documented on paper maps sitting in file drawers right now. So we're doing a bunch of work right now to try to unlock the potential of that asset. But to date, most of the institutional network that we've done has been built on top of these existing infrastructure platforms from other providers. That said, the value that we've gotten out of that for the city has been absolutely tremendous. It's saving the city somewhere between, most conservative estimates, $3 to $5 million a year in cost for telecom and connectivity. And it's allowed us to really start to transform the business of the way that many departments operate that historically are not the first place you'd think about where internet connectivity would be most important. We had a huge rainstorm a few weeks ago, and I got a call on a Saturday morning from the Public Works Commissioner who said, I can't tow cars because we lost our connectivity at the tow lot. And it turns out the way they do towing now, because they do alerting to citizens when your car gets towed, it's more or less completely dependent on having internet connectivity. Not the first thing you'd think of, but whether we're looking at it from the perspective of our public safety systems, our schools, the administrative and operational side of things, our free Wi-Fi that we've built on top of the network, what we see is this continued expansion, often in ways and in angles we didn't expect, of how people are relying on this. And so that value of just having the bandwidth there, making it available, and letting city government learn how to use it and integrate it into its operations has been huge for us.
Well, and in Portland, Oregon, we created in 2002 the ERNIE network, Integrated Regional Network Enterprise. And it's a totally collaborative network where we share assets and conduit with the Regional Transit Agency, all the local governments, the State Department of Transportation. And by sharing our assets, each of our networks extends much farther and is much more robust than it would be if we did it on our own. So I've heard that as a familiar theme here today. Collaboration is really important. We were spending about $8 million a year in 2002 for T1 connections to all of our government buildings. Now we have two 10 gigabit rings. We have dual entrances to most of our buildings. We have fail-safe connectivity to the public switched network, to the internet. We have a satellite backup just in case the big earthquake hits, which is expected to within the next 100 years, in case we're isolated. So our network has made a huge difference. If you can imagine, for governmental uses, if you have a 10 or 20 layer GIS map that you need to float to different people, the network is completely unconstrained because we have gigabit connectivity through our fiber network. And I can't emphasize enough how the collaborative partnership among all of the local jurisdictions and the State Department of Transportation has really made a difference. And we're just engaging in what I'll call a responsive city project, which is a project that will include health and transportation. And we're going to need to use that fiber to transport large amounts of data that we'll be collecting in this project. Furthermore, this network really serves as a regional takeoff point for what we hope will become a 311 system to connect our governments in the area to our citizens. So it's been incredibly successful, collaborative, cost-effective. I think it's good government at its best.
Well, and we can push into the partnerships a little bit. I want to turn next to Gail and Ashley. And I think you're sort of partnership heroes here. We have somebody from Kansas City, Missouri, which is one of the more acrimonious metro areas where regular sort of polite warfare across the border. You're working together with Google Fiber, but also with area local governments. And then, Gail, you've decided not only to work with local governments, which is challenging to pull them all together on these efforts, but also with AT&T now. And so what I'd really like to know is what are some of the challenges, and we'll start with Gail, what are some of the challenges and what are some of the benefits of these massive partnerships, both with local governments and with large private companies?
Sure. So we always know that the challenges are associated with collaboration, getting everyone on the same page, understanding that you have the same values and the same goals when you're dealing with human beings. But the benefits, I would say, for us were that we actually developed an RFP, advertised for private sector to come in and build out a network for us. During that period of time, 6 cities came together, 3 universities, Duke University, NC State, and UNC Chapel Hill, 6 cities in our metro area. And what we did was got together and talked about what we really wanted for our communities. And even though the communities differ in terms of population, in terms of needs, whether the individuals there are very young or aged individuals, we found commonalities. Sitting to the table, understanding that we all wanted to benefit our communities and our population was the greatest benefit. One of the other things that I can say about our effort was that it not only brought AT&T to the table as a response to the RFP, but we also created some interest from other providers as well. Our main objective was to engage and create competition in our region, and I think we were successful there.
Excellent. And actually, let me just ask you to just follow up very briefly and describe for people maybe a minute on what NC Engine is, because unfortunately not everyone is aware of it.
NC Engine is a regional effort where 6 cities came together and actually developed a collaborative effort for an RFP that was advertised for an entity to come into our region and actually deploy a high-speed fiber network for us.
And so you're working with a company, I understand it's called Google.
It's a small little company, you might have heard of it, yeah.
So what has it been like? Not only have you, do you have this relationship with Kansas City, Kansas, but you were the first, and now you're able to sit back and see how others are experiencing it. But what was it like, both navigating the waters of working across the border of Missouri and Kansas, and then also working with Google?
Well, I think we were very fortunate that when Google came to Kansas City, we happened to have leadership in place that understood that the value of regional collaboration far outweighed any competitive advantage we might have over each other. And so the development of the Bi-State Innovation Team to really address what the impact was, not just of bringing this new capacity to our cities, but what the impact could be in various sectors, and as you drill down into what the benefit and quality of life, which I think many of the mayors mentioned earlier, and how that improves quality of life, is significant. And that has since spun off into a key organization which continues to drive building and fostering those partnerships and creating a dialogue that exists beyond just one municipal government, which I think is really critical, because while we definitely see that, the collision of people and people moving to get to live near each other in one city may create a certain capacity, if we don't grow as a region, we won't compete as a region, and therefore we'll fail. And we'll fail not just the constituents that live here today, but the generations that would potentially come to the Kansas City Metro. And I think by working so collaboratively from the onset, we've been able to work with our partners to create additional opportunities, like the Digital Inclusion Fund, which offers nonprofits in the region opportunities to apply for money to help expand our capacity, whether it's through the direct access to the tools themselves, the educational opportunities. And I think those type of things don't happen if you don't work together from the onset.
Sure, and let me ask you just about when you have less control over the network. In this case, one of the effects is that you have a lot of people that have been trying to get residential houses and get service there so they can run a business out of them. Can you explain a little bit what that's like dealing with as a local government, and how does one respond to that sort of a situation?
So Kansas City sees itself as being the most entrepreneurial city, and I think we, in order to drive economic development that occurs around gigabit capacity, is looking at different economic incentives than what we traditionally use. So the kind of tax increment financing and things like that don't work for the startup community. And so finding ways to create free or low cost space for people to work in, or better access to capital and things like that, those are things that we can help that are new, that are different tools than what we've traditionally offered. And I think in order to open ourselves up to that entrepreneurial community, we have to in fact kind of get out of the way of those traditional mechanisms and be receptive. And I think what we've seen is Mayor James and Kansas City, Kansas have done a great job of creating those conversations and allowing people to bring those resources together, and enabling things like the Kansas City Startup Village to happen, where you have a high density of startups working in Google Fiber homes, and they in turn have gone out and crowdsourced to improve infrastructure in the neighborhood and do other things to essentially create their own vibrant ecosystem, which I think is very exciting.
Excellent. So I want to, I'm going to go to Jory and Terry next, but I want to see if any other panelists have any comments on these partnerships, because everyone here has worked one way or another with other partners. But none of you are really excited about that, so I'm going to go on to Jory and Terry. In preparing the panel, I laid down the law a little bit, and I said, I really want to make sure we try to answer the double questions first, but I welcome a little bit of rebellion if someone's so anxious to throw in a point, so please do that. Terry and Jory, in many ways, I think you're both model communities. Terry, you're a model that a lot of cities with electric utilities follow, and Jory, you're a model for a lot of communities that don't have electric utilities. And so I just want to spend a moment, and we talked a little bit about this in the earlier panel, but Terry, what are some of the advantages and some of the disadvantages of being a municipal utility? And just mention what other services you're already providing.
Yeah, in Lafayette, Louisiana, we provide electric, water, and sewer services. And I believe that gave us a substantial benefit in getting involved in telecommunications. First of all, we had our own rights of way. We knew how we had our own poles. We had already been providing a service where our customers eagerly await their bills every month. We had already been in the public light in having to provide these essential services. When the power goes out, for example, you're there having to explain that to the press as to why the squirrel got involved, because it's always a squirrel or a bird that causes these things. And there was a high level of confidence I think our customers grew to have with us. We get these little storms come up every so often called hurricanes. And the last hurricane we had before we got involved in the telecommunications business actually knocked out every customer in about a 6-parish area from where we were. And we were the first utility to get its customers back on and to get all of its customers back on. that gave us a huge level of support for the community and confidence in the community that we could do something to this next level. So I think certainly having a utility system was a huge advantage for us.
And let me follow up with a quick question. You also have a target on your back from industry. And as a utility system, opponents will often say there's opportunities for subsidization and inappropriate use of tax dollars. So on the record, do you know how many tax dollars you've used in building your network?
Absolutely zero.
Right, the answer is zero for the mics.
One of the things that happened in Indiana is the private companies, as soon as they knew we were getting ready to do this, went to the state legislature to try to introduce model legislation from ALEC that would make it a fair playing field. Of course, that model legislation was absurd. It said that to build a telecommunications system, a government had to use only revenues it earned from selling telecommunications services, which means it starts off at zero at that point. We fought that battle, and in the end, we got a piece of legislation in place that's not perfect, some we felt we could live with, and as time went on, found out that there was all sorts of hooks for our opponents to drive us to court and delay us from being able to provide our services, et cetera. But in that legislation, it made it clear that we could not use utility dollars or tax dollars. So this is a true grassroots entrepreneurial system. Very difficult to build a startup from nothing. When you're borrowing money, you have zero customers to begin with. It's a tough ride. But it was what we had to do, and our community supported us, and thank goodness we were successful.
And so, Jory, you do not have a municipal electric utility, and you have gone through a very long process to get here. Maybe briefly walk us through it. I think we've already discussed some of the history of it, but just fill in the gaps where you think that it may have been an advantage or a disadvantage not to have a municipal utility, and any advice that you have for those who don't have a municipal utility.
Well, going back to your earlier comment, it starts with squirrels and birds. And we've quickly realized that we could be on poles, and we were thinking about possibly moving to poles even though we don't have an electric utility ourselves. And we looked at joining the Joint Pole Authority, and we decided that would not be a good idea. We'd be the last ones on the poles that were already oversubscribed. That would be a big tax on our local taxpayers, and we decided that that was not something we were going to do. And like squirrels and birds, we decided not to be in the air. We decided not to be on fences. We decided to be underground. So we quickly looked, as a city that already has a water and sewer utility, we looked at ways in which we could utilize assets that we already had. We needed to be creative. We started by, fortunately, some good timing. We started by negotiating a cable franchise with our local cable co. And through that cable franchise, for 1/3 of the cost that we were paying to our entrenched CLEC, we built a fiber optic network for the city, the schools, and the college. 46 facilities were connected. The city saved about 2/3 of what it was spending with the local CLEC. We took those 2/3 and decided to strategically go about building a system that would be underground, but that would not just serve government, but would serve our industries as well, and our stakeholder institutions. We laid out on our GIS platforms where all of these were through our business license directory based on service industry code, where our redevelopment plans were, where our long-term land use and circulation element called out for redefinition of our community. And we looked at also our assets, our roadways, our water mains, and our sewer systems. And creatively, over the years, we took advantage of every one of those assets, and we ended up building it underground. And with political will and some cooperation within the city, the Public Works Director, the Planning Director, and myself and many others in the City Manager's office, we sat down, and believe it or not, every time something was done underground, we had a dig once policy internal to the city. And everyone had an opportunity, whether it be street repaving, water main abandonment, laying of new water mains or sewers, and we built it over time with some creativity.
And do you have advice besides being creative? And in particular, let me ask you about a city that does not have in place right now somebody who can take this and run with it. You're an elected official in another city. What do you do to try and get that level of expertise? Where do you look for it?
Well, I think you need to start with your technology people or your chief innovation people. You should look to your CIO, your CIO, or your CTOs, but that person by themselves cannot do it alone. They need to reach out to the people who actually own and operate the assets. When we started, I didn't have any staff for this. I didn't have any cherry pickers. I couldn't, put people underground with jackhammers. But my associates working together with me and over time and collaboratively allowed me to review all the plans, to be able to review development agreements, to be able to get our signature on an approval to move forward with those things. And before any development agreement now is established and negotiated in the city, finalized and negotiated in the city, we actually have a say on whether or not there'll be a vault for that structure or whether or not there'll be some reciprocal arrangement where they'll donate some fiber instead of a tree or a park or whatever it might be. So Santa Monica has realized that this is an asset that's extremely important to the community, just as important as anything else you would negotiate in a development agreement.
So I want to ask the entire panel, whoever really is excited about answering this, dealing with the public and informing the public and getting the public enthusiastic. And I'll just say that I think one of the tremendous successes of Chattanooga came from hundreds, and according to Dana Bailey, I believe she said maybe over 1,000 public meetings that they had about their network. It's an incredible challenge, particularly because the first number of meetings almost always have 5 or 6 people, and they're familiar faces. So Mary Beth, Portland's had an incredible outreach program and an engagement program. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. We have a really strong neighborhood association group and business association group. They're all by neighborhoods. And I think many communities have existing social networks that you can tap into. Go to where the people gather. Don't have the meeting at City Hall downtown. Go out into the community where they are and talk with them where they are. I think the other thing is, instead of, I call it the Migo effect. My eyes glaze over when you start talking about fiber and system architecture and networks. Instead, what really engages people is talking about applications and what we might be able to do in the future. And I agree with the person who said the gigabit of the future. The thing I love about it is that we don't know what it's going to be. I mean, that means your imagination can just take off. So I'd say go out into the community, tap into those existing social networks, and be talking about applications and how it's going to make a difference in people's lives.
One of the things that we didn't involve the general public, but we began very early on to work with our chambers, both the local chamber and then the regional chambers, who hosted sessions for us to bring in business people where they could actually sit down and talk about the benefits to not only the public but to the private sector as well. Once we started working with the chambers, they would involve the regional chambers, and they've had several sessions. We've also gone into the annual leadership chamber meetings and done presentations on the network. It was a good way for us to not only get the word out, but to bring in the business community as well.
And let me ask you just briefly, how did that start? Because I've talked with a number of communities that have very supportive chambers. Lafayette had a supportive chamber. Other communities can't get the time of day from their chamber of commerce. So how did yours come about?
Persistence.
Okay.
Primarily having good relationships with the chamber. I consider our city to be very much focused on economic development, and going in and actually doing quite a few sessions with the chamber presidents to help them understand what it is. Traveling, doing a little bit of road shows in regard to how high-speed broadband can benefit communities. So I say persistence. Like Mary Beth said, you just really have to get out of geek talk and begin to talk about the things that benefit from a digital inclusion, from an economic development, from a healthcare perspective, and having those conversations.
Excellent. And Jory?
We actually reached out individually to CEOs of production and post-production companies, to CIOs from technology and new media firms within the city. We also reached out to our Chamber of Commerce, and we explained to them the value of what this would bring not only to the community as a whole, but to businesses. And we established with the Chamber a business alliance. It was a relationship that the Chamber had with the city, as well as commercial property management companies and property management and commercial property brokers. We did some lunch and learns. We threw some pizza and some salads on the table with property management companies and commercial property brokers, and we explained the value of having a lit building, having a smart building, and what that would do for rents and for attracting new technology businesses in the city, and how that would start to generate some interest in especially startup companies moving into smaller spaces, and then as their companies grew, moving into their larger spaces, and then new companies coming in, working through the incubators to fill those vacated spaces by their predecessors, and creating a dynamic engine which we have today for economic sustainability.
I might add the Google Fiberhood model, where you started to see neighborhoods go green when they had enough interest in subscriptions to the service. You started to see the kind of economic divide that exists in our city by geography, as certain neighborhoods were not going green. And so we actually saw, as a result of that, a pretty remarkable grassroots effort to mobilize and inform neighborhoods about what the potential was, with 25% of households not having access at home and 17% of our population not having any internet access anywhere. It was definitely an opportunity to start seeing broader conversations within the community, and so I think that mobilized groups like Connecting for Good, which continues to do great work today to help bridge that divide through better digital inclusion strategies. I think we see that continue to grow as an important strategy, because if we want entrepreneur-led economic development in Kansas City, we need to create greater access.
Joshua, let me ask you about other lessons from Dig Once. So, paper maps. I know from other communities I've heard that there's something called as-built, which means not as once envisioned, but how it actually is in the ground. What sort of things for the community that recognizes that Dig Once policy is right for them? Where should they go to learn more about how to implement it?
That's a good question, and to be honest, it's one that I think we're looking as we figure out how to actually update and modernize our Dig Once policy. I mean, I think a lot of it, and this is the report you mentioned earlier that looked at what Santa Monica has done and the incremental approach to building the network, I think made a good point, which is that you sort of want to know what you're trying to achieve. What are you building for? Are you building we kind of, I think, we're so early to the game that we didn't necessarily know quite what was that conduit was going to be for, what we were going to use it, how it would come together into fiber rings. And so consequently, there wasn't a lot of thought given to questions like, do we ask for just stretches of conduit? How much control do we exert over the places where that conduit meets? Do we want empty conduit? Do we want conduit with fiber in it that we can then use or create an open environment around? So I think those are sort of the questions that you want to be asking yourself, but ultimately coming from that standpoint of what are you trying to build? And I think, to be honest, Boston's policy originated primarily in a desire to reduce the amount of damage to the pavement that was happening, not for a fiber network. That was the goal. They wanted to make sure that the same utility, or that two utilities were not going to dig up the same stretch of pavement in a 6-month period, because of course that creates issues for citizens and maintenance issues for the city. And so the intent of encouraging leasing transactions, I think, was really the original origin of the policy. With fiber in mind, though, understanding what is that core, whether you're thinking about it as a service to provide to residents and businesses, or whether you're thinking about it simply as a municipal INET, doing some of that architecture up front and building a Dig Once policy that gives you the opportunity to say, okay, this is a project where we have an interest, and here's how this project can actually align with that interest. That's going to be key.
Right. And I know that when you mentioned the desire to preserve the payment, the 1998 study that JORY worked on, basically, if you could summarize it, it would have said, 1996 Telecom Act, anyone can dig, what are we going to do? So what are some of the lessons that you've seen, Jory?
So when we started studying the results of the 96 Act and sort of looked into our crystal ball for the future, we realized that there was going to be a lot of money spent, and we waited, and we waited, and we waited. And it didn't come. So we realized, oh, we need to prime the pump, and we need to do something about this ourselves. Although we knew that once we primed the pump, and after we built it and created a market niche, others would come. So at the same time, we realized we needed to have a right-of-way ordinance. We started with a right-of-way management, actually a set of guidelines. And the guidelines were interim while we adopted those with the community, being the utility companies and telecoms, and decided that we would turn that into an ordinance. Of course, we had a lot of pushback. We didn't end up having any lawsuits, fortunately, but we did end up implementing an ordinance. And the ordinance said a couple things. One is that anyone who is digging in the right-of-way needs to provide documentation. And we had already, fortunately, been collecting that documentation, but it solidified that with documentation of the as-built plans. So you had to have everything permitted if it was going to be done by the private sector, and even if it was going to be done by the city. So we pay lots of money ourselves whenever we're in the underground in the right-of-way, and we develop plans, and we have a very rich set of plans for everything that's, all the assets that are underground, which helps us not only in mitigating time, place, and manner, and how often the streets need to be repaved and how long we can protect the life of those streets in between times that they're cut, but it also gives us a good operations and management tool. So when we're digging ourselves or others are digging, we can look to see what's under there and we're not stepping on one another.
If I remember correctly, you are just embarking on, or perhaps continuing, a significant effort to put a lot of fiber throughout Raleigh for traffic signalization.
Yes, we actually have 3 initiatives. I talked earlier
I'm sorry,
about...
you want to just start over, just to make sure the mic picks it up. It's on now.
We actually have 3 initiatives, and I talked earlier about encouraging competition in our region. We are building out a traffic signal network, 125 miles of fiber through a 148-mile city. We are, of course, responding to and beginning to develop the NC Engine RFP response, which is with AT&T to build gigabit fiber, and we're in our final months of coordinating the checklist for Google Fiber. So we believe that we spurred that kind of competition through letting individuals know what we want as a community to come in. So yes, I think that the fiber with the traffic signal network will be an INET and actually serve our own facilities. We have about a 7-year return on investment for that network, basically just moving away from what we're doing today in terms of connectivity. So we're excited about that aspect of it, but it is a flurry of activity right now within our region.
Are you self-financing that?
We are actually doing that through capital dollars, but to date, no grants, and to date we have no debt associated with it.
I bring that up just briefly because I know that the Department of Transportation has some ambiguity and some barriers that some of our members are facing regarding what you can use that sort of infrastructure for if you have some grant that help pay for it. So that's something we're going to be looking at and working on. I want to pivot a little bit, and I have a question from the audience already queued up, but if we want to start passing the microphone around, I'll recognize someone in a little bit. Terry, I want to ask you, in dealing with elected officials on a very technical, challenging topic that most elected officials are not very familiar with, I want to ask you if you have any tips, but I want you to lead into it by setting the stage for us when a new young mayor was elected and came to you when you were the head of the utility system and were not sure if you were going to be continued or not because you were not his biggest supporter in the election. So if you could set the stage for us a little bit.
Yeah, actually, my previous boss ran for mayor, and Jory ran for mayor, and my previous boss convinced me to make a campaign contribution, which was probably not one of the wisest moves I ever made. and then Jory won, and I was wondering if I would get a phone call from him. He and I had worked on the Chamber of Commerce before, so we knew each other. Lafayette's a town of 125,000 people, but a lot of people know each other. So Jory came to visit me, and the first thing he did was offer me a job, so I was thankful for that, check one. And then while I had him there, I talked to him about two major projects that I wanted to pursue that had been held up by the previous administration. One had to do with building new generation plants, electric generation plants in the city, and Jory was in general agreement with that, and we started talking about the telecommunications system. And his first question was, why would we want to make that type of investment just to provide, cable TV? And I said, no, I said, we need to look at it in the same thought pattern as, waterways and rivers was what created commerce in the beginning, railroads, electricity, interstate highways, internet was that highway of commerce for the future. And this could make a huge economic development opportunity for us. And his response to me was, I'm not sure if we should do it or not, but shame on us if we don't at least look into doing it. And at that point, he brought in some people he knew to listen to the story, and they also believed. And as time went on, it became kind of a grassroots sort of thing. So I guess in dealing with elected officials in general, I found that having the grassroots support was very helpful. Having the trust and confidence that they had in the utility system was very helpful. And then keeping the message so that any person could understand was very helpful. We didn't talk about gigabits or megabits. We talked about this being the highway of commerce for the future and what that could really mean to our community. And with Lafayette being a very entrepreneurial community, they grasped onto that. And then, as Jory mentioned, one of the things that helped us probably more than anything else was the pushback we got from the private guys, because controversy loves newspapers, or newspapers loves controversy, whichever we want to look at it. It just created a lot of noise, and people saw us as being the entity they wanted to support.
One of the stories that Joey's told in the past is that on issues in which they thought they would have overwhelming support from the public, they struggled because there was no controversy, nobody was informed about it. And so it's tremendous to have that. But I'm curious if there's other lessons, and I'll certainly take fun anecdotes, even if they're tangentially related, for how to deal with elected officials on these very technical matters.
Well, we had a different strategy in Santa Monica, and it wasn't necessarily working with our elected officials. Our elected officials were wholeheartedly behind our telecommunications master plan that said build it for universal access, build it for the schools, the college, and for the city, for all the kinds of smart city initiatives that we've already implemented today. And also, if you can, build it for businesses. One of the things that I learned about politics early on was that politicians come and go, and initiatives come and go. And sometimes when things get inflated and become a community issue, it becomes a community issue. And like anything, there are all different ideas about how money should be spent. So my takeaway was walk softly and quietly, and don't promise too much.
Are there any others? If not, we can move on to the most challenging topic I think we'll deal with, which is making sure that everyone that wants to connect is able to. One of the challenges in this that we can start with is apartment buildings. Whether you're trying to wire them, as Lafayette has found out, the incumbents can play tricks, or Google's taken some criticism, and I want to ask you, Ashley, about what local government might be able to do, but I also want to set the context, because I hate this question and the way it's often framed. Some people want to vilify Google for the approach they've taken, and I think it's important to note that Google is not doing anything that others haven't been doing for a very long time. Our system has long left behind the people that have the least ability to pay. And I actually think the Google system is a substantial improvement over the status quo, although it does not get us to where we need to go. So for those who aren't aware, Google has a program where anybody can connect. It's a $300 upfront fee or a $25 recurring charge for 1 year, I believe. And you get 7 or 8 years of DSL-like service of 5 megabits by 1 megabit. And the trick to that is in apartment buildings, the entire apartment building has to be wired at once, which is very sensible if you're spending the money to wire. You don't want to go unit by unit. That's a challenge in areas with greater income disparity, where people don't have the ability to pay, and landlords, frankly, might not care. So what can the city do in these sort of situations?
Well, I think actually one thing that's been kind of interesting as a result of that challenge is that there's been a nonprofit and private sector response to it by the establishment of a mesh network that can put some of these, wire these buildings and at least provide Wi-Fi. And I think that's an interesting response because we can't necessarily solve every problem. So I think that's one thing too, is that we acknowledge where we are able to be effective in creating opportunity. And I think that the establishment of the Digital Inclusion Fund is another opportunity as well to look at other ways around that. So I think while I don't think we've solved the problem yet, I think the fact that we continually keep it on a high priority list and we're working very hard to address that actively, I think that's something that at least we know that that conversation is something critical to the success of the implementation overall.
If you did solve the problem, they would sing songs about you for a long time. I mean, that's it would be tremendous. What sort of stuff would a Digital Inclusion Fund spend on?
So there's a couple of different components. One is, teaching how to access, providing the tools to access, whether it's a refurbished computer or being able to actually get online itself. So there's different components of that. And then I think the other part of it are partners that, like US Ignite and others, that are really looking into how do you delve into kind of the education and healthcare sectors that have huge impacts on the quality of life, and those impacts can then translate into individual benefits and services. And I think as a city, what we've tried to do is figure out how we can also meet people where they are, which I think was part of the strategy that was mentioned for community engagement, but also when we think about this entrepreneurial ecosystem, making sure that we are providing ease of access to services and updating the processes by which you use the city. I think we found that there are some very old rules on the books that have been around for a very long time, and if we don't actively readdress that with this new wave of how people are accessing us, but also managing community engagement to understand that it isn't all online as well. I think that this conversation has made us more attuned and sensitive to the fact that we can't just solve everything through social media, and that the latest app isn't going to fix city services for most people. It provides a great service for a lot of people who want to access us that way, but that we must continually address how do we apply services in an analog way to get people what they need where they need it.
Excellent. And Gail?
Sure, I'd like to reflect on that because it is one of my passions in regard to what we do going forward with the high-speed network. But we just didn't start this today. We have been boots on the ground for over 5 years in terms of looking at our communities and finding out how we can better digital inclusion. It's a culture within my organization. We have had a 5-year program where we actually work with youth for school throughout the school year, 2 nights per week, and my folks are actually out there in the evenings. I think the main thing is you have to know your communities, and I think part of that is making sure that if you can't take fiber to the home at a particular time, that you're at least looking at your community centers, where people gather, where students gather, so that they have access to this close to home. We were able to get BTOP funding quite a few years ago to do several of our underserved communities in Raleigh, and we continue to move in that direction. So I think it really has to be about knowing your community, knowing what the needs are in your community, and not surfacely basically saying that you're going out to educate people. I think you need to know more about where those gaps are, and I think you need to engage your organization in making it part of the culture of what you do on a day-to-day basis.
I'm also very passionate about that issue, and the way that we're looking at it in Portland is that income disparities are just going to grow if we don't help get everybody online. And what we want to do is what's happened with sustainability in my community. Basically, sustainability now is just part of our DNA. And so our mantra is, let's make digital inclusion part of our civic DNA so that this platform is available to everybody, not just the haves. And to that extent, we're collaborating. Again, comes up the C word. It's going to take the whole community and the providers and the nonprofits together to solve this issue because it's a tough issue. We are tracking the folks who are online. We did a survey in 2010. We updated it in 2014. We've made a little progress. I completely agree with Gail. You need to know your community. Who's online? If they're not online, why aren't they online? And then how can you get them online? And sometimes the answer to that question depends on who it is you're trying to reach that isn't online. So we're having a Digital Inclusion Summit on November 18th, bringing together our nonprofits, our libraries. We want to build on the mission of community media, and they're beginning to get into digital inclusion and one-on-one training to help people see why it's important to be online. So I think along with fiber, digital inclusion needs to be at the forefront of our efforts.
Yeah, I would add to this. I mean, we're still in the early days of our fiber journey in Boston, but we actually have a really interesting legacy around digital equity issues, in large part due to the incredible work of Deb SOCIA in a former life running the Tech Goes Home program in Boston that tried to address all three legs of the stool, if you will, looking at education, looking at access to, looking at connectivity, and then looking at equipment, and trying to identify the populations where some elements were missing and bring that together for folks in the context often of schools and small businesses where there was a good sort of why story to tell. Why does this matter? Why is this something that's important in the community? Some of what we're doing right now is looking at our lowest cost broadband programs as the way to start to learn a bit more about where the demand is. We have, Boston has a wicked free Wi-Fi that we have been rolling out. It's existed in the downtown areas, the tourist districts for a long time. And under the leadership of Mayor Walsh, we've begun to roll it out into the business districts throughout the neighborhoods of Boston. And what we've seen as we've done that is that the highest usage neighborhoods outside of the tourist areas are in the lowest income parts of the city. And so that becomes something that we say, okay, this is a market signal. And so we're starting to explore what does that mean. We're looking at how do we collect more information, both directly meeting with people in the neighborhoods, but also looking at surveys to try to better understand the landscape of what people do and don't have access to technology-wise. And we're starting to do some pilot experiments. We're in talks with the Boston Housing Authority that manages a lot of our public housing developments about running a small pilot where we would just extend Wi-Fi into the community and then work with local community groups to try to drive adoption and to understand how that has an impact for people. So I think partly we see this opportunity to say, yes, would we like to have fiber, gigabit fiber available to every house in the household and business in the city? Absolutely. In the short term, we can start to show the demand and show the potential impact that satisfying that demand can have locally, and use that to tell the story from which we can leverage into a broader investment and a broader build.
So is there a microphone floating around already? We have a question. If anyone wants to put up their hands if they have a question, we'll get the microphone to you. One of the questions that came in earlier over Twitter from the city of Los Angeles was what role Wi-Fi may play. And I think that touches on some of the digital divide issues. But I'm also just curious, Terry, you've analyzed Wi-Fi a number of times over the years. Do you want to talk a little bit about your thoughts on Wi-Fi and how it might complement your system and what challenges are that would lead you to not deploy it?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing we need to realize is in our case, it's a purely business system. We don't have a tax dollar coming in. I have to make sure that every decision we make is made from a prudent business perspective. Providing Wi-Fi service is a nice to have, but it's very difficult to build a sustainable business model with it because the reliability of it, the type of coverage you need, the cost it makes to provide a type of coverage is very expensive. So what we have tried to do is to use Wi-Fi as more of a promotion tool for us. So it's some of the downtown areas where there's large stages for festivals and events, we've been starting to make Wi-Fi available there. So the patrons, the people who go to those particular events, get to utilize our service, realize what it is, and then perhaps actually buy our service if we're serving in that particular area. But as we've seen it so far, Wi-Fi on its own is not something that I would want to take a risk at in trying to provide.
And just briefly, what is the risk? The high operating cost of keeping it going?
Well, it's the high operating cost and the lack of reliability. What you run into is that you get dead spots, and it takes a tremendous amount of cost to be able to cover all of that. And if you're doing it for a very large territory, the cost just cannot be overcome with the revenues that minimal revenues you might be getting off of that.
Some of our communities, interestingly enough, cities that haven't gone citywide with fiber, Ponca City in Oklahoma has a fiber network that they run to businesses and produces enough revenues that they do Wi-Fi throughout the entire city in the case of Ponca City. And in the case of Lafayette, in the case here in Santa Monica where we are, you have significant Wi-Fi in some of these areas. And I know that it's hard and difficult. What are some of the benefits of Wi-Fi that have led you to make that decision?
Well, first of all, I want to dispel this notion that Wi-Fi is hard and difficult. It is not. Wi-Fi is cheap, very effective, not only useful for your public, but also for your community services.
I think that's a really good point to just push into. I'm curious if I can just go back to Terry for a second. When you say it's hard and difficult, is that because you have a certain quality of service in mind that you're delivering?
Yes.
If we can just briefly explore this, whether it's hard and difficult, and in what ways it's not difficult.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, to be able to provide a service that impresses the user is going to be more expensive to make that happen. If we're trying to do something just to provide minimal Wi-Fi, it possibly would be cheaper, but that's not the direction we want to go into. We're a high-end a service provider, and we feel we need to be offering services that are consistent with that.
Okay, and Jory, did you?
Well, we find that you put Wi-Fi access points out there. We have 35 Wi-Fi hot zones throughout the city, and almost all of our commercial corridors and transit corridors are now blanketed in ubiquitous Wi-Fi throughout the city. We find that we put them up, it's very inexpensive, and once you put them up, they typically don't fail. Our Wi-Fi systems have been out there for more than 7 years, and we have not had any failures with them. They drive cool kinds of apps for the public to use while they're navigating about Santa Monica and their mobile. We've done this in business improvement districts. We've done this for city applications, be it security video cameras or smart bus applications. Our current Hold the Light Green project for giving transit signal priority to buses is actually utilizing our Wi-Fi for tracking the buses and their schedule adherence, speaking then back to our broadband network to whether or not the traffic controller will hold the light green or not. We have security cameras that are wireless where we couldn't actually install wired systems, and they're backhauling at 5.8 gigahertz the signals where we wouldn't have been able to implement technology had it not been for Wi-Fi. We're using it for streaming video out of police and fire vehicles, and we're using it for routing of solid waste vehicles. We are also using it for real-time parking advisory signs, wireless parking meters, pay-on-foot stations for parking payments, and a whole host of applications that make it easier to live, to work, to be mobile, and to have a sense of well-being while you're here.
You're working on a pilot project going into some of the low-income areas, multi-dwelling units, where just for people who aren't aware, you have FiOS in a substantial part of town, but not everywhere. Is Wi-Fi playing a role in this strategy of going into some of the areas that don't have as many options?
We don't distinguish between Wi-Fi and broadband. It's all the same. We just use them based upon the bandwidth needs of the particular application and or the user experience that we want the public to have. So we are implementing now broadband within multi-dwelling, low-income housing units in the city as a pilot to take our CityNet to the residents. We're always starting with the underserved areas within the city. There is a FiOS wire center. There are 3 wire centers that serve Santa Monica. One was not upgraded to support FiOS. We actually begged and pleaded very hard to get FiOS to come, and we did get FiOS here. But of course, just like all cities, It's our responsibility to make sure that all of the community is served, and we know that the private sector is really only interested in cherry picking and taking care of their shareholders. So government's role is to invite others to invest, but also where there's holes in that investment strategy, it's our job to make sure that those people have universal access, aren't left without those new services. So yes, we are implementing both broadband and Wi-Fi, and we'll continue to grow both of those, but depending upon the need and the function.
Okay.
Paying for all of that? Where does the revenues come from?
I'm glad you brought that up. There was something that I left out, which is when we got started, our strategic telecommunications plan said a couple things. One that said that if you can, pool all of your existing telecommunications costs and your resources together, pull all those budgets together and create a master plan. And just like other cities have, Santa Monica enjoys having the savings after having implemented the INET. And from the INET that was built for us by the local cable co, we've been able to save upwards of $800,000 a year. That may not sound a lot to you big cities, but for Santa Monica, that's a lot. And we've continued with a strategy of being able to roll those savings over year after year and not have to go back to the general fund for additional monies. We are self-sustaining. So we continue to use and bankroll what we started with in terms of savings to continue our efforts to build out our broadband fiber and our wireless systems.
One of the things that's really worth reiterating is they had elected officials that said, we have a lot more money in the budget, we could spend it over there, or we could keep giving it to JORY to keep reinvesting. And in this case, they went with the latter, which is why we're talking about CityNet and why we're in Santa Monica rather than a different place today. And just briefly with Ponca City, we're going to certainly be looking at all of our different cities and highlighting them up, but we've written a little bit about them on muninetworks.org, and they built their wireless system throughout the town for public safety, and they had excess capacity that they then turned on and they don't charge people to use. So we are seeing some of these sort of free wireless models, but a lot of time are predicated on they're paid for some other way, and they're not expected to serve themselves. They're more as an amenity. We had a question that I want to direct to you, Ashley, which is about open data. And you are an innovation officer, chief innovation officer, and I sort of associate that with the rise of a lot of open data. It seems like open data has gotten more popular, and often that's within the job title of an innovation officer. So can you tell us a little bit about how a proper high quality internet network changes open data, if at all?
Well, I think one thing that we see is some of the open data that could come out of smart city data, basically. So having this access to infrastructure and understanding what the potential is to be more effective and efficient in service delivery. We have huge challenges when it comes to aging infrastructure, as every city does. We are a large geographic area with fairly low density considering, and so we have a massive burden to manage all of this infrastructure. So being able to assemble that data on large scales, we don't have the internal capacity for analytics that can really help us delve into solutions. And it also, so it presents an opportunity to open that data out there and put the solutions in the hands of entrepreneurs that can be more agile and develop kind of just more flexible, innovative solutions than something that we could come to with a canned RFP that we kind of understand this is what we want. We're asking for a vendor to provide us with that solution. We can open up the data and let the community of maybe sometimes smarter people than we are to solve those problems. And I think that's been a really exciting opportunity for us. And what we've done in Kansas City is we've actively engaged young professionals in this conversation about what open data should mean and how it is valued to the broader community. And I think by having that conversation early and regularly and at the level of the Mayor's Challenge Cabinet, we've been able to excite more people about what the potential is and create a bigger space for civic tech to come in and help us solve problems. And we actually have partnered with cities across the country to help look at solutions to come up with better ways of providing services based on that data.
Right, okay. Yes.
From an open data perspective in Raleigh, what we've done is to actually have a open data portal for citizens to consume data, and that's been up for a while. But now we're looking at how we could use the open data portal to get fiber associated with fiber and sensors and getting just-in-time data. So open data is old. The data is old. It may be a month old, it may be a week old, it may be a day old, but it's not just in time. So we're looking at ways that we might be able to marry open data and sensors to begin to get just-in-time information. And the other part of open data that I would like to mention is our strategy and our challenge is to use that open data to begin to make good decisions within government. I think that is key to the benefits of having information available to you. So how do you turn that around? You'll have citizens that will consume data, and you'll have a technology community that will be interested in that. But how do you make good decisions as it relates to taxpayers' dollars with open data? And that's really where we see the marrying of open data, open source, and open access.
Excellent. we're gonna be wrapping it up here a little bit, and in a second, I'm gonna ask you all to very briefly describe the biggest impact that has resulted from either the network that your city's working on or your work, and what makes you the most excited for the future. One of those two options. But first, I wanna, just moderator prerogative, I feel like I always try to balance out the amount of time, and I feel like, Joshua, we haven't had enough time for you. And I want to ask you to briefly answer why, we have tremendous amount of talent on the panel, but a lot of the qualities of a CIO, you could make a significant more amount of money in the private sector. You could do a lot of things. Why would you want to be a CIO? Like, what leads you to do this?
Well, as somebody who recently moved from the private sector to the public sector, I have a point of view on this. I think for me, my career in technology has always been at the intersection between technology and society. Where does technology actually change the way people live and work? And I'm a big believer in the ability of technology to do good. It's not inherently good, but if we use it right, if we harness it in the right ways, it's a tremendously powerful force for transformation in people's lives. And when I look at government and the way in which government works, or more often doesn't, at the federal and state level, I see the potential in cities to leverage technology at the point of interface between people and their governments. You deal with the federal government once or twice a year. You pay your taxes, a couple other things. City governments, if you live in a city, you deal with all day, every day. You drive on the streets, you send your kids to school, you rely on the public safety. And so for me, as somebody who wants to see the world get better, wants to see the world get more equitable, and who believes in the power of technology as transformation, I can't think of a better place to put my skills and my energy to use than in city government, where there is so much opportunity and so much need.
That was... that was an incredible answer. It was an ambush question. I gave you no warning for it, so I'm impressed. I'd like to start with Terry, and you have a closing comment, so whatever point you want to make, if it's on my question or not, go ahead down the line.
So that's your question? Just say whatever I want to say.
Exactly.
I give you that freedom as sort of someone who believes in decentralization of authority.
Well, I believe that the decisions of the citizens of Lafayette made for this fiber system are going to pay dividends in many years to come. It's been a tough battle for us. We've been through so many lawsuits, so many delays, so many games being played, so many costs that we had to incur, that no one in the state of Louisiana has looked at doing this except for us. And it's because we've had a strong mayor, a strong council, strong public support, strong employees to make it happen. This is a sort of thing that I think every community needs to look at doing that fits what they want to do going forward. But it's not for the faint of heart. It's not for anyone who's going to be looking at what the polls are the next day or what the news story is the next day. You're going to have to fight, and you have to fight every day. Every morning, I wake up thinking about what things I'm going to have to do to be able to deal with the competition. It's a tough battle when we have to do it the way we've had to do it, but it's a worthwhile battle.
Mary Beth.
In Portland, we can't sit on our hands and wait for the state or federal government to solve our problems. We have to create our own future, and that's exactly what we're doing. We developed a broadband strategic plan a couple of years ago, and I would encourage anybody listening to do the same, put it in your comprehensive plan. And there are groups like Next Century Cities, the Click Network, NATOA. We are all willing to share information, cold call any one of the member cities, and they'll help you. The leadership has to come from the cities because the federal and state have failed us.
I would say to remember to think about what fits your city, to kind of get outside the traditional box and think about public-private partnerships, think about what is good for your city, to make sure that you focus on inclusion, that you make it a culture in your organization, and that you really move forward keeping in mind that one size does not fit all.
My message would be to those who have not ventured into this space is that ultimately you will, and you will either be able to manage it and control it yourselves and be in charge of your own destiny, or someone else is going to do that for you. You can define your future starting today, or you can let someone else in the private sector do that for you. I believe that what our mayor said today was we want to be in charge of that destiny, and it's our responsibility to make sure our communities thrive in this new next century. So I believe it's important for all of you who are thinking about doing this to get motivated, to join Next Century Cities, and to start planning a system that will provide a smart city initiative, that will create economic development and sustainability, that will bring startups, incubators, accelerators, angels, and VCs, and that will attract business, believe it or not, from the private sector. When we started in Santa Monica, there really weren't too many people investing. We've shown that there's a market niche here. We've created that market. We've created that dynamic economic environment for others in which to come and to invest in. And that's only going to do more to benefit our community. So take charge, get started.
Well, I'd like to invite everybody to come to Kansas City. We have a Gigabit City Summit in January, and it's a great opportunity to continue to share best practices and ideas. And I think one thing that's unique about Kansas City is that we have a regional approach. We also have a confluence of many different conditions to try and explore and innovate. And I think we are also very welcoming with excellent food and on our way to an MLB championship. So it's definitely a place to come. And so I encourage that, but I think one of the things that I appreciate about Next Century Cities is it's a platform for that exchange, and I think it's really important for us to learn from each other. And I know that in the short time we've been here, I've gleaned a lot of great information from our city peers that are here, and I think it's important for us to do that because it is where it is, and cities are the #1 place to be, and Kansas City happens to be the best of all of them.
Well, I can't compete with the best city of all of them, but you know, I would just say, you asked a little bit about what I'm excited about, and I think for me what's exciting here is the challenge that we have. If this were easy, if there was a model that we could just pick up and replicate, we wouldn't be here. This entity wouldn't need to exist. I'm excited by the opportunity that we have to figure it out, and figure it out in each of our own local circumstances. Some things are the same, some things are going to be different. We have some unique challenges in Boston, ranging from weather to labor costs, but all of these things are surmountable, and I think what I'm most excited about at this event and to be a part of Next Century Cities is just the energy, the creativity, and the engagement that people have on these issues. I'm excited to be a part of that, and I'm excited to find the ways that we can adapt everything that you're doing and everything that you're learning back home at Boston. So I'm really glad to be a part of this group.
Well, thank you, and Deb's going to come up, and I think we're going to exit.
Thank you. That was really fabulous. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Chris. Those are some amazing stories of really hard work that has so benefited the cities. And I want to thank everybody who's come here in person, all of our elected officials and the folks who have come from the area. I want to thank everybody who is joining us virtually. Thank you so much for being here. If you are interested in knowing more about Next Century Cities, please visit us on our website, nextcenturycities.org. If you are a city that's interested in maybe joining us, please also go to our website, nextcenturycities.org, and communicate through there to us. We'd be happy to reach out and talk to you. Thank you all very much for being here.